Hi, and welcome to Art with Mrs. Torres. Today we are going to be learning about this amazing phenomenon called the aurora. Now, these pictures here were taken in Canada. This is the Aurora Borealis, which means the northern lights. Now, these pictures are actual photographs taken by different photographers in Canada. I want to point out this one especially because this picture was taken by a photographer named Dr. Wayne Lynch. And I want you to notice that there is a reindeer, now they call them caribou in Canada, in the foreground, and you can see the northern lights happening in the background. Now, what are the northern lights, you're asking? I'm wondering myself. I read about it and I learned that it's the particles from the sun traveling toward the earth. Now, our earth is so strong, it has a magnetic field, especially at the North Pole and the South Pole. And these magnetic fields are able to push those particles from the sun back. And it's like a dance that happens in the sky between the hot particle sun, called the solar wind, hitting our magnetic field. And that fight between the two of them becomes this beautiful light show and dance that happens in the sky. Now, unfortunately, the photos don't really show the dance happening, but if you Google it, you'll be able to find some amazing videos of the lights actually moving in the sky. It's kind of like a curtain that's traveling, like a rainbow curtain that's floating up into the atmosphere. It's so beautiful, and I wanted to try to recreate it today. So I think what we're going to be using is some watercolor paint. I'm excited because we're going to be taking some watercolor, moving it around on our paper to kind of recreate that image of the northern lights. So follow along with me. We're going to have a lot of fun today.
Let's begin our lesson. Now, I found this photograph when I was searching online for photos of the northern lights or the Aurora Borealis. This photographer, Dr. Wayne Lynch, took this picture. This is what we call a reindeer. It's called a caribou in Canada. And these are the northern lights, this amazing phenomenon that happens in the sky. And he took this picture. If you go to his website, you can see many more beautiful nature pictures that he has taken. So I thought it would be really fun to try to recreate this picture. Now, as you can tell, I did not choose to do just the greens of the northern lights. They do mostly come in greens and blues, but they have been seen in many other shades. There's purple, blue, green, even pink. So I thought it would be kind of fun to recreate this picture. What we're going to be using today is watercolor paper. Now, it is important today to use watercolor paper. Please do not use the paper that comes out of your printer. It's going to be too thin. So you're going to need a piece of watercolor paper, and you're also going to need watercolor paints. I'm just using a basic set. You're going to need a couple different size brushes today. So you are going to need a large brush for laying down the water and the paint. And so you can either use a flat or a rounded brush, just something that's larger than the little skinny brush that usually comes in our paint set. Now keep that skinny paintbrush because you can use that later for our trees. The other item you're going to need is either a white gel pen or a white colored pencil. Now this is not mandatory. This is just if you want to add some stars later. Now white colored pencil works really well. The gel pen is just a little easier to add if you want to put some stars in. Now, the last thing you're going to need is just our basic Sharpie marker, the one we always use, and I call him Mr. Chubby. It's the one with the little bit wider tip, and we're going to be using that to draw our caribou, and you're going to need a pencil just for sketching out the caribou, just to give you some rough draft before we draw. So don't forget you're going to need water and a napkin. So let me repeat what we're going to need really quick before we pause that video to gather our items. A piece of watercolor paper. You also need paper behind the watercolor paper. This is important because we are going to be literally tilting our paper and letting all of the paint drip onto whatever surface is underneath your paper. Now, we don't want to be using something that's important, so don't put it underneath your homework, but you would definitely want to be putting it old magazines, newspapers, paper towels. So you need some type of surface underneath. You're going to need a piece of watercolor paper. Speaking of watercolor, you're going to need water. You're going to need a napkin for wiping your brush off, some type of large brush. Either one will work. You're going to need a smaller brush for details, and you're going to need a Sharpie marker and a pencil, and of course an eraser. Finally, if you would like to add some stars, you can use a white colored pencil, a gel pen if you happen to have one, but if you don't, trust me, the painting doesn't need it. It's just an extra little detail. Go ahead, pause that video, meet me back here when you have your items, and we'll get started. Okay, welcome back. First thing you're going to be doing is putting your water either on your left or your right hand side, depending upon which hand you use for painting. Secondly, you're going to be putting your watercolor set directly below that water. That way you're able to quickly move through and fill your paint pots with water. That's the first thing we're going to be doing, is taking some water and dropping them into the colors you want to use for your sky. Now, if you look at this photograph, you'll notice that the sky is mostly yellows and greens and black. However, if I show you a few other pictures of the northern lights, you'll see many different colors in the sky. So please do not feel limited to only doing the colors that you saw in our original photograph. I'm going to be kind of playing with the colors. Now, the first thing we're going to be doing, as I mentioned earlier, is dropping some water in the colors we plan on using. Now, I'm going to be using red because I don't have pink, and I want a little pink in my sky. The red will still appear pink. Then I'm going to be dropping water into the yellow and the green for sure, and the blue, purple, and lastly, black. I do want to add some black, and that color is going to help really add this kind of dimension to the top of the sky. And then what we can do is let some of the lighter colors flow in. Wait till you see how we're going to do this. It's going to be so much fun. Plus, if you have a little bit of black, then you can go in and add some cool white stars later. Okay, first thing we're going to be doing is wetting our paper. We're going to be using a large brush. Remember, I gave you two options for a large brush. It can be flat or round. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to be using my rounded brush. I'm going to be working a section at a time. I'm going to break my paper up into 4 sections, and I'm going to be working quickly. As I lay my water down, first thing you're going to notice is that I'm not trying to paint it perfectly. I'm just quickly getting water all the way across that paper in one section, working very quickly. However, don't allow this metal part, that's called the ferrule of the brush, to scratch your paper. So once I've got some water there, I can start to lay in my first color. I'm going to go with my lightest color up here at the top and just pop in some yellow. Now you'll notice if I drop a little drop of yellow down here, it doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. That's because my paper is dry there. So as you can see, I want to be working quickly and making sure my paper has enough water on it to spread. Now I'm moving over to the left-hand side of my paper. I don't want to put too much water that leaves giant puddles, but for sure I want it to be wet. Now I'm going to move into some green. Isn't that fun? I'm going to wet my brush, add some more water to my paper. You'll immediately find the spots that you missed because the water won't spread. I'm going to add a little bit more water right there. Now I'm going to carry that water down to the bottom, moving pretty fast into my next color, which is blue. You can put it anywhere you'd like, but you'll notice the color is not going to spread if your paper isn't wet. Now my paper's starting to curl up like a little taquito, so I want to flatten my paper with my fingers. I'm going to carry this water over to the final corner of my paper, and the top of my paper now is dry. I can already see it's dry. It's not going to be able to spread anymore, so I'm going to add a little bit more water back up here. Quick, quick, quick. Now I'm going to lay in my final couple colors. So I'm going to go in with some purple. Rinsing my brush. I'm going to pop in maybe a little red. And for sure, add a little bit more green. I really like that green. Now, any place that your paper has a dry area, I want you to tap it with your brush real quick right now, just to help those colors spread. Our final color we're going to be laying down is black, and you want to put it just kind of around the top of your paper. So I'm just going to come up here and drop in a couple drops of black up at the top. You can put it just in the corners if you want to, but you definitely want to have a little bit of black up there. Don't worry, it's not going to ruin your picture. Now the fun part, we're going to take our paper and we're going to tilt it. We're going to let those colors start to drip down. Now you might have to help those colors drip a little bit if your paper got dry. So you can go up here with just a damp brush and put a little bit of water right on the edge where the paper seems to be sticking. See, my paper's dried right there. Now once I've let those colors drip down, I can tilt my paper and you can see those colors start to move. You see that spot right there? It needs a little water. And then I can add just a couple drops of water at the bottom. And now trade the direction and tilt it back the other way. Now I'm going to let those colors trickle off the edge of my paper. If you have to, you can always add a little drop of water somewhere, and that will make a nice light spot. So if you want something really light in your painting, just to break up the dark color, add a little water. See what I'm doing? And you can let that color trickle. Let me turn my paper this way so you can see. And then you'll get a little white patch. If there's a spot where your color is not moving, remember, that's just because your paper dried. Go ahead and add a little drop of water just to help those colors drip off. I have quite a few patches over here. There's a little spot right there. When you're all finished letting your colors move and shift and change, then you're going to take your painting and you're going to put it outside. So I'm going to take my background paper. I'm going to lift this whole thing up. Of course, your fingers are going to be kind of messy, but you can wash them. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to carry this outside into the sunshine and let that dry. I want you to do the same thing and then meet me back here once your painting's dry and we will finish our picture. We'll be doing all of our detail work of our silhouette trees and, of course, our caribou. All right, I'm going to do one last drip. Meet me back here. Well, welcome back. You've allowed your paper to dry. Now look at this, is so funny. When my paper dried, there was a big drip of water that kind of just left a spot here. So I might end up turning that into a moon later. That would be kind of cool if I could maybe draw a moon over that area. So what you're going to need now, before we begin, you are going to need a smaller paintbrush now. Now, it doesn't have to be super skinny or tiny, but just something that's a little bit more narrow. So this is the one that came in my little paint set. I also have this old brush. These will work great. You're also going to need a Sharpie marker, and that will be for us to be drawing our caribou. And you're going to need a pencil with an eraser, either a magic marker eraser or use the bottom of your pencil for erasing. You're going to need some water for wiping off your, cleaning your brush, and a napkin for wiping off your brush. So the first thing we're going to do is decide what section is going to be the top of your paper. So in this original photograph, you'll see that it was light at the top and there's a little bit dark at the bottom. This is what I'm going to be doing with my painting. I'm going to be creating some ground that our tree and our caribou is going to be standing on. I like to have the dark up in the sky here. However, you don't have to do that. If you do leave the dark at the top, you can go in later with a white colored pencil and you can make some stars. Another way to make those stars is by using a white gel pen. If you have one of these around the house, that's another idea. But the white colored pencil will work great. So now, before we begin, let's decide which direction you want your paper. You can turn it this way. You can turn it this way, decide. I'm going to leave my paper this way so that I've got my dark up at the top. Down here at the bottom is where I'm going to be creating dark by painting it. I'm going to begin by using my paintbrush, a little water, and adding water to my black paint. It is kind of dried out since I took some time to let my paper dry out. So I'm going to fill up my well of my black with some more water. I'm going to tap my brush into it just to kind of loosen up that paint. I'm not pushing down very hard. And then I'm going to take my paper and I'm going to paint along the bottom. So when I look at this photograph, you'll see that it's just a hillside that's kind of top higher at one section and lower at the other section. So I'm going to create kind of the same idea. Just going to start up here and make some type of line, and then I'll take a little bit more paint and then just fill the space in using my brush. Now, if you have your chubby brush that you used earlier near you, you could also use that to fill in the space. Always adding a little bit more water to my brush to help spread that color. Now you'll notice that since our paper is dry, we're able to control the line and get a, excuse me, and get a dark, crisp line. When our paper was wet and we put the paint on, our paint spread. So this technique of letting that paper dry and painting with wet on dry, we can get a really sharp, crisp line. So once I've created my hillside, then I'm going to switch over to a little bit more narrow brush if you're using your fat brush. Now I'm still working with a medium-sized brush, so I can use this brush. And we're going to create a tree. Now in this photograph that Dr. Wayne Lynch took, the only thing that you see is the hillside, this amazing background of the sky, a few stars, and the caribou. For our picture today, we are going to add the silhouette of a tree. Now, I was inspired by looking at some of these photographs of the trees silhouetted by the beautiful sky. So that's what we're going to be doing. So especially if you look at this, the first thing I want you to notice is that you can see the trunk of the tree. It's going to be wider at the base and more narrow as it goes up to the top. And then I want you to notice the branches, because the branches get progressively smaller as they go up to the top. That's what we're going to be creating right now. So especially notice this tree right here. This is what our tree is going to look like when we begin. Then we're going to fill it in with some more branches later. You are going to need a more narrow brush to do this. Make sure that you have a brush that comes to a good point. So I'm going to check my brush here. Mine comes to a point, but I am also going to be using my even finer brush, this one, later. So I'm going to be using both these two brushes. We're only going to be working with the black paint. So we're going to start by deciding where you want your tree. Now I did 2 trees. When I first did this picture, I had just one, but I thought it needed another tree. So I just added one off to the side here. So first, just decide where you want your first tree to go. And you're going to take your brush, you're going to dip it into the black paint. You're going to kind of wiggle your brush around, but we're not going to start painting yet. I want you to get your napkin and tap the first drip of paint off of your napkin. Otherwise, you're going to get a big blob on your paper. And you're going to decide where you want your first tree. Now, we don't need to use a pencil to do this. We're just going to go ahead and go straight in with our paintbrush, holding it straight up and down. I'm going to start from the bottom, and I'm going to very gently draw a line with my paintbrush that goes up toward the top, but I need to stop before I get to the top. Now I can lengthen it later. I'm just creating my first space. Now I'm going to put my caribou right here in the center, and I'm going to draw another tree over here. So I'm going to get a little bit more paint on my brush, tap it on my napkin so I don't have a big drip. Holding my brush straight up and down, I'm going to do the same thing. Another long line that goes up, 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 up to the top. Every once in a while, your bristles might spread out and you might get a little mark, but don't worry. None of that's going to show as we move into making all the branches later. I'm going to make this tree a little taller. Now, using the same brush, now we're going to divide the tree into sections by building some branches going horizontally from the bottom to the top, and they're going to get progressively skinnier. So I'm going to hold, I don't need any more paint. I've got plenty of paint on my brush. I'm going to hold my brush. I'm going to draw the first line about 2 fingers away from the ground. So I'm just going to go like this, kind of eyeball, and I'm going to draw my first line. Now the bottom branch is going to be longer than any of the other branches. And then I'm going to progressively create these branches to get a little shorter and shorter as they go up. I'm going to do the same thing on this, a couple spaces away from the bottom. And you don't need to add any more paint to your brush. Every once in a while, I got to go back and extend my lines. Once I'm finished with that, I'm going to get a little bit more paint on my brush. And now I'm going to build up that trunk and made it a little wider at the bottom. That progressively gets skinnier as it goes to the top. So I'm just going to add a little bit more thickness to the bottom. But you want to make sure that when you're doing this, that it makes sense. Like that does not look like a true tree trunk. So what you want to do is kind of progressively let those lines that you're painting become thinner and thinner and thinner as they go up. So this is a good place where you can switch out your brushes and go over to the brush that's a little skinnier. So I'm going to switch out to my little bit skinnier brush. Always tap your brush because you're going to get that big drip on your painting if you don't. I'm going to go up and make my trunk get a little bit finer and skinnier as it goes up. I'm going to do the same thing on this side, chubby it up at the bottom. Now, if your paint seems a little bit too see-through or thin, just tap your brush in there to kind of mix those sediment of the black paint in with the water. I'm going to spread it and bring it up above. Remember, that does not look like a natural trunk, so it needs to be wider at the bottom and progressively get thinner as it goes up. Now, if you really mess up and you think, oh, it doesn't look right, don't start over. Once we start adding all the little detailed branches up at the top, no one's going to notice even the trunk of the tree. Okay, from here, now we're going to start building up our branches with little tiny dots. We're going to be using our brush, and we're just going to be tapping it. So I'm going to take my brush, dip it into the black paint, tap it onto my napkin. If I don't tap it, I'm going to get that big glob on my paper at first. So now each one of these branches are going to be built up wide at the base, right here near the tree. I'm going to build it up a little wider. Just tapping my brush. And then as it gets out toward the tip, there's going to be less little dots. Now don't grab any more paint. You have enough paint to probably paint 3 or 4 whole rows of branches. So from here, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do the same thing, wide at the base. And then it's going to progressively get skinnier as it gets to the tip. And then I'm going to do the same thing on each branch, going up, up, up. Now, don't worry, your tree is not going to stay like this. This is just the first section that we're doing. Once we're done with this, we're going to fill the space in between. So I'm going to have you pause your video. I'm going to continue doing this one tree, and you're going to do just one tree right now. So you're taking your brush, you're tapping it on your napkin, and you're going to build up these little dots wider at the base, and it's going to get progressively thinner as it goes out to the tip. And each one of these branches should get progressively a little bit thinner and skinnier as we get up to the tip top. So go ahead, you work on yours, I'm going to work on mine. I'll meet you back here once our first tree is done. I have finished my first tree. Have you finished yours? Now I'm going to do the same thing to tree number 2. Dipping my brush into the black paint, wiping it on side, tapping it on my napkin, and starting to build up now. My lower branches, they're going to be the chubbiest, and especially near the trunk. So as I'm tapping my brush, I'm just bouncing it all around, making it nice and chubby around here. Still, you can see shimmers of light in between, and then I'm going to progressively get skinnier as I go out to the tip. Now, as we're doing this, make sure, please, that you always tap your brush. I got in a hurry and I forgot to tap my brush and I got a big old glob of black paint right there. So I'm reminding you, take a few seconds just to tap your brush before you begin so you don't end up with a big puddle on your paper. And if it does happen, don't worry, we can always fix it. So go ahead now, pause the video, finish tree number 2. If you did 2 trees, if you did 3 trees, go ahead and finish your 3rd tree. And then meet me back here and I will show you the final part of filling in our foliage on our trees. Now I'm going to go in and start to fill in the foliage around the trunk. So you'll notice there's like a soft filter of different tiny branches that you can barely see. It just almost makes it look fuzzy. And so instead of it being so stiff like this, now we're going to go in, taking our brush and filling the space in between. And when we do this, we're going to keep that same pattern of wide at the bottom and more narrow at the top. But we're going to be doing it just by tapping our brush. So a little bit of paint, tapping on my napkin. I'm going to start down here and I'm just going to start to fill in the space. So right next to the trunk, I'm going to just start to lightly tap my brush. I'm going to wipe it on my napkin just a little bit more so my dots are smaller. And I'm just starting to very lightly tap and fill in the space. I don't want it solid. I still want to be able to see my beautiful sky through the branches, but it's going to get progressively wider as I go down my tree. You don't need very much paint. Oh, don't forget to flip your brush over. There's always paint hiding on the other side as well. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to make it a little bit darker toward the trunk, and it's going to get a little lighter as it goes out. So I'm going to do one side of the tree, and you can see how it's a little different than this side, right? It's starting to look a little bit more natural. We still have a few more things we'll do. So now what I'm going to have you do is you're going to go in, same thing I'm doing, get a little paint on your brush. Please don't forget to wipe it on your napkin, and then you're going to start filling in the space in between those branches. Remember, you want it to still go kind of like a triangle, wider at the bottom. You see what I'm doing here? And it's progressively going to get more pointy as it goes to the top. So go ahead, once again, pause that video and do both of your trees this way, filling it in with little dots. We're still not done. We'll have one more trick after this, and then we'll move on to making our caribou. Now both my trees are almost complete. Now for my final part, I'm going to go in, rinsing my brush off. I'm going to clean it, bring it back to a super sharp point, get just a tiny bit of paint on my brush, wipe it again so there's no drips, almost till it's dry. And I'm going to go in and add just a few tiny little dots around the edge, just to kind of break it up so it looks a little bit more natural. You want to have a few tiny little fingers coming off the branches. See what I'm doing? I'm just kind of going little tiny little fingers almost coming off of each one of those branches to make it look a little bit more natural. So I'll show you this one side done. You'll see the difference. So I'm adding kind of like little tiny arms or fingers coming off of those mini branches. And if you want to kind of tilt it up a little bit on the ends, so look at the difference now compared to when we first started. It's really looking more natural. So I'm just going to do the same thing on each one of those. Just adding a few little dots with hardly any paint. You really want to wipe your brush on your napkin before you start to do this so that your dots are really tiny. You probably could do almost all the branches on one side of the tree with the amount of paint that's on your brush, especially if you flip it over. Because when you flip it over, there's always a little extra paint hiding on the other side. So I'm going to do this on both of my trees, and then I'll meet you back here when I'm done. You go ahead and do the same on yours. Okay, welcome back. Now I'm going to rinse off my brush, make sure that it's nice and clean before I put it back in my paint box. And now we're going to move on to using a pencil to draw our caribou. So let me find my original photograph. I want you to see that beautiful caribou. We call them reindeer, but isn't that just amazing? This photographer, Dr. Wayne Lynch, captured this. I just think it's magnificent. So I'm going to put the photo of the caribou right here above my painting because I'm going to be using it as a reference for drawing. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see how we're going to draw our caribou. Using our pencil very lightly. So the first thing I do is I break everything up into shapes. You know that, right? So when I'm looking at this, the first thing I see is an oval on its side. I need to save some space for those legs down below. So I'm going to be making an oval on its side. Then I'll add another hump for this little shoulder later. The neck curves slightly up. The head's going to be a circle with a small extended line that comes down. Those antlers are going to be a lot of fun to create. So let's go and decide where I want my caribou. First thing I need to remember is I gotta save space for those beautiful legs down below. So I don't want to start my oval here. And think about the spacing. You don't want to have a caribou this big on your picture. That would not make sense in relation to the tree. So you want to make sure that the size of your caribou matches your picture. So I'm going to go right here above the ground, and I'm going to start by making a very light oval. Now from here, I'm going to start to build it up to create the shape looking like what I see here. So first off, look at the rounded back. Right here where his bottom is, I'm going to round it up just a little bit. See? Then there's a hump. So right here where his shoulder would be, there's going to be a little bit of a hump. And the bottom is larger than the hump. So I want to make sure that that goes up a little higher in the back. Now the neck slightly curves up. So I'm going to bring the neck up right here. And look right here, it's kind of a fat neck. So I'm going to bring that neck coming down here. And I'm still looking at the body. And I notice right here, he's got a rounded belly. So I'm going to round his belly. This whole thing will be colored in later with my marker. Next comes the head. So you see right here, the head is going to start with a circle. So right here, I'm going to create a circle. And then if you look right here where his muzzle is, it tilts slightly down. Just very similar to if we were drawing a horse. It's going to curve around. This is going to be a small curve. It's going to go up, and then it's going to connect back. Now look at the ear. The ear pokes out behind his head, saving lots of room for those antlers. So I'm just going to make a small loop right here for the ear. His forehead seems to come up a little higher. And his muzzle looks a little wider. So this here is going to be pretty close to what I'm seeing there. Next, we're going to draw those cool antlers. So first thing I notice is it looks like oh, maybe we should do the legs. Poor thing, he doesn't have any legs to stand on. Okay, let's look at the back leg. The back leg is right connected to the bottom right here. It comes back on a slight curve. So I'm going to slightly angle it in. And if you notice where the joint of the knee is, it comes straight down. So I'm going to go in and then straight down. And just like the tree branch, it's wider at the top and it gets more narrow toward the bottom. So I'm going to make it slightly wider at the top, narrow at the bottom. Now the second leg, this is his back leg on the other side, is bent backwards this way. Matter of fact, if you look at horses or deer or reindeer, Caribou, their legs bend the opposite direction than ours do. Our knees bend forward, their knees bend backwards like our elbows. So I'm going to leave a small space. There's not a huge space between those two legs, so I'm going to bring it slightly back. See how it goes back? You can look at the negative space in between to see that. And then it comes forward. And make sure that that leg is a little wider at the top and a little bit more narrow at the bottom. There we go. And now I'm going to draw the front legs. So the front legs are right here underneath that shoulder hump. So here's my shoulder hump, and the legs pretty much go straight down, maybe a slight curve forward, wider at the top, more narrow at the bottom. That's leg number one. This is going to be the leg on the back side. Wider at the top, a little bit more narrow at the bottom. Also, he's got a little bit of fur on his chest here. We'll add that later with the marker. Now, our final part is our antlers. So if you notice, the antlers are curving kind of like a backwards C. So what I'm going to do to begin is just draw a backwards C up on his head like this. I'm going to draw another backwards C. And then from there, you can draw the little branches, the offshoots, however you would like. You don't have to copy what you're seeing in the photograph. You can kind of create it however you would like. I'm going to make mine pretty similar to what I see up there, just a little bit more exaggerated. Okay, once you have your drawing done in pencil, we're going to switch over now to your Sharpie marker, and you're going to ink it in with your Sharpie marker. Now remember, when you're using a fine tip marker, you want to hold it straight up and down, and that way you get the finest point when we're holding it straight up and down. So the first thing I'm going to do is outline my image. And you don't want to stop your marker when you're drawing. Remember, you want to move quickly. When you're working with this marker, the faster that you draw, the cleaner your lines are going to be. So once I have outlined everything, I can fill it in later. Now I'm just going to outline everything. Now my antlers are so skinny, I really can't outline them. I'm just actually tracing over my pencil lines. But now I can go in and fill in using the side of my marker. So when you're coloring, you want to take your time on this part. Pull your marker towards you. Don't push it away. When you push your marker away, you can't control the line, and sometimes it makes the tip of the marker spread out. So you want to pull the marker to you with long lines. And since this is such a small little part of your picture, you don't have to work really fast, scribbling back and forth. You really want to be able to control those lines as you do this. Now I might add a few hairs later, switching over to either an extra fine point marker, or I can use the tip of this marker. So I'll show you that once I'm done. When I'm looking at this photograph, I notice that there's little tiny hairs where he's a little furrier down here where his chest is. So I can go in with this marker, but if you happen to have an extra fine point marker, this one would have the flat top on it, you could also use this. And what you can do is just go in and make just some very minute little hairs, just to make it look a little bit more natural. You can also use it to just retrace the outline, just to clean up your lines a little bit. One more thing. Would you like to add some stars to your picture? You can use a white colored pencil You can use a gel marker like this, if you have one of those. And when you're using these, a white color pencil will work. You can just go in, and if you wanted to make a moon in the sky, you could just go in and very lightly find a space that you want to add a moon. See, this white colored pencil can just go in and very softly give the illusion of a moon. You can also add stars by just taking your white colored pencil and tapping it in little tiny circles to create some stars. Now your stars are only going to show up in dark areas. Now let me show you, if you're using a gel marker, these work really well too. Exactly the same way. You just can attach them a little quicker because you don't have to press so hard. But as you can see, they both look exactly the same. So white colored pencil or a gel, just to add a few stars in your sky. So I hope you had fun. Don't forget to send me an email. I want to see your pictures. rtorres@lcusd.net. Have a great day.